Hey, it's day 3 of Game of the Year. Who's ready to keep talking about video games?
Absolutely.
Yay. We got 4 more categories today. Here they are. Best World. I think we're going to nail down exactly what that means as we discuss it. Please stop. Best Wolfenstein II moment or sequence. And then best moment or sequence.
Congratulations.
These are congratulations, in advance to Wolfenstein for getting its own category this year.
Seriously. I guess we'll get
It was
there.
necessary.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll explain exactly what that means.
Yes, we will. Also, today of all days, there will be spoilers.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for Wolfenstein 2.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
But also for other games.
Yeah.
So be wary.
Yes.
If,
This is the...
if you hear us mention any game that you care about playing, turn off the podcast and go play it.
Or turn it up real loud because
Let everybody know.
everyone needs to know. Yeah. Play it into a speaker at a supermarket.
Alexa, turn up the podcast.
There you go. All right. Here's the nominees we have for Best World. Who came? Alex, was this yours? Who came
I
up
think
with this
I
category?
initially pitched this one, yes.
What does this mean to you?
So what it means to me is that there were a lot of games this year that did a great job of world building. In some cases, that was just about an open world game, a space that you really love hanging out in and exploring. And in some cases, it was just like, world design. Like, in the case of, not to get too deep into examples here, but like in a case of something like Pyre, you're not really, exploring a wide swath of that world, but I loved hanging out in it. I loved going from place to place and just seeing the art and just kind of, being in that space and that fiction that they had built around it.
Okay. Kind of like a best sense of place?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to be a good place.
It's just a place that you really like exploring and
Is
just
well
feeling
realized.
out. Yeah, and is well realized.
To me, this feels like a thing that is based on physical movement in a space to some extent, although there are a lot of games on here that don't fit that, so this is...
I have a feeling the games we ultimately narrow it down to probably will be more exploratory ones, but...
we have a wide-ranging list of nominees here.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be like running around in this world.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Here's what we have. Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Mario and Rabbids, Assassin's Creed Origins, Nier Automata, Night in the Woods, Battle Chef Brigade, Tacoma, Pyre, Yakuza Zero, Horizon Zero Dawn, Observer, Cuphead, Uncharted The Lost Legacy, Splatoon 2, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus.
And go.
All right.
Who put PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds here?
That feels like a late addition.
Pachinki.
I kind of see where you're going with this.
Remember
Like
when they put all that meme graffiti up?
That was bad.
That was
took it
bad.
on.
That destroyed my world.
That was there for like 3 weeks.
It was there for some esports tournament.
Yeah, I can't hold that against them too
esports
much.
ruins video games.
Yes.
It's well documented.
I actually am super into the crumbling, like, former Soviet bloc vibe of that game.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's fucking awesome.
but also,
that's where the murder takes place.
It doesn't seem like every map is going to necessarily reflect that
Maybe.
stuff. So
that's what it is right now.
I think that's sort of the hard thing there.
And this is not necessarily a point in its favor because I don't think this necessarily is consideration for it, but I have absolutely loved the way people have sort of formed their own little fictions about the history of that world and like the borderline fan fiction people have written about it.
What?
But it is borderline fan
I think like
fiction.
that game has a really
not
generic,
official.
Not official.
Yeah.
No.
That game has a really generic art style, but then people have imbued it with a lot of character. You know, from the school to the prison to
Right,
the
and
tunnels.
it's just the people imbuing that.
Right.
It's nothing
It's not the game.
Like,
Yeah.
the game is not much to look at. But
It's like these
The game looks like an asset flip. Come on.
Yeah, it totally does. You're right.
boring, like visually boring locations that like everyone kind of has these weird fond attachments to.
Yeah.
That's the thing is
There's
that
something
it's
about
so
that I kind of like.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
it's so hollow that you can project literally anything onto
Yeah.
it.
You start to wonder, like, well, I mean, these were houses. What happened? Why are there no
Yeah, of
people?
course.
Like,
right.
like,
Why is there food out?
yeah,
They get
yeah.
murdered.
There's a lot of questions that game leaves you with if you stop and look at stuff.
But I feel like those questions aren't always super intentional. It's more like, why is there like a bush growing out of this house? And like, why are there footprints on the wall?
Yeah.
I don't know, that's
Good
kind of funny
question.
though.
like
It's
shit
fun.
went down. Yeah,
sure.
no,
And like, I think it's fun, and I like it, but I think it's another one of those things where it's like people make it fun. The game doesn't make it
Yeah.
fun.
It's not necessarily top 3 here.
Right.
If this category
fun-
was best set dressing, then sure.
Well,
But
I also think it's interesting that like just they are like the hospital, the school, the
Yeah.
military base, and like you just
Mansion.
said like the mansion on this. Like, what other kind of things can people say the about?
The down plane.
The downed plane.
The blue.
military base.
yes.
Be a bad place to live with
I
the
feel
blue
like the
situation.
mansion doesn't look much like a mansion.
Not really.
While we're
No.
talking
No.
about it, but
The ruins.
Doesn't the mansion also like? Isn't that the train station? Like, there's like a building over there that looks like a big open kind of train stationy looking thing, but
you
there's
should
no
read-
train tracks.
Should read my fan fiction as to why that is.
All right, so that doesn't count.
That's gone. Okay.
Yeah.
I do like the world of Horizon Zero Dawn, but mostly it's the ruins and the storytelling that happens around that ruins.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, that the world building they do in the collectibles and all that other stuff, I think is the thing that makes that game special.
I definitely like the environments. I like
Yeah.
the visual
Yeah.
style of this game.
Yeah,
like
I
the
do
ruins
not
of
like the
skyscrapers.
cultural, appropriation of that
Yeah,
world
but
at all.
the stuff of like why are there humans now, and also like what happened to the humans before
that is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
I like all those a lot of the text stuff is like super worth finding and reading.
yeah.
They don't always draw your attention to it as well. Like I feel like the
yeah.
material is better than they lead you to.
The stuff that is like on kind of the main story path is like the revelatory stuff,
okay.
but at the end of it, like if you didn't collect a lot more of it along the way,
Right.
that moment I bet is not as interesting.
Like, because there's a zillion icons on that, like the text entry thing. There must be like dozens of, but I've only
there's a lot of
found.
stuff.
I mean, I'm like 20 hours in. I've only found like 6 or 8 of them. Every time I find one, I'm like, wow, this is super interesting and
Right.
pretty thoughtfully written.
yeah,
I
when,
wish
when you
I
start
wish
to get to the
they-
reasons of like what actually happened to the humans and what is the thing that Aloy is coming out of and
Right.
why can she interface with it, like
Right.
all that stuff is really cool.
Yeah.
I love those vantage points where you can see like glimpses of
kinda
like
neat.
red rocks or the
Yeah.
skyscrapers before.
The idea that like collectibles are just like a not quite McDonald's coffee cup or
Right,
other
right.
weird stuff like that.
They're attaching different meanings to it. It's like,
right.
oh, ancient
Yeah,
civilizations
like they're-
probably did this.
Probably did this, and you're just
Yeah.
like, no. You look at it and you're like, those are car keys. You
Yeah,
dumbass. Like, yeah.
Here's my big knock against this game, and this is like a weird broad category, so I don't know what actually factors here, but I don't enjoy moving around in that world much at all.
I don't see a ton of stuff to like move around and go see.
There's not a I mean there's the collectibles which
Yeah.
are kind of few and far between, but I just mean like the way the character interacts with the terrain. Like like the climbing is absolutely fucking awful.
Yeah, it really is.
Like there are like waist high rocks that you run up to and you just sort of hop in front of when you try. Like
yeah.
you can't climb, you
Yeah.
can't like navigate things.
I don't know that that's
Cleanly.
necessarily what we're talking about here.
I don't think it factors.
But
If
I
we're
think
talking about a place,
I
that
think
is
joy of
enjoyable.
exploration is definitely an element to it.
Yeah.
And having invisible gates like that doesn't
Yeah.
really
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
This game, like I said, the stuff that makes that game special is the stuff under the surface,
Yeah.
and it is way less about the thing you're doing while you're playing the video game.
Yeah.
So I think in that case, like there are stronger games that do better at both of those things.
Yeah.
I
Um,
don't know. Like that's like a good case for world building in the
Right.
traditional sense.
Kinda, yeah.
So like I'm
they
not sure.
built a world that I would love to see more fiction set in.
Right. So like if that is a factor of this category, then I think that's a strong case for that to be on here.
But if exploring the world is a chore,
right,
getting to the good stuff is a pain in the ass.
Right.
Like,
If the mechanics of interacting with the world are taken into account, like I'm not just sure where we're at with this category.
I feel like this category isn't about like the fast travel points were bad,
Right, right.
or
Or, like, the
like the
mantling
climbing was
is-
bad. Like it's not that.
Right.
It's the world they're creating, the
Yeah, so-
fiction of it.
So
the,
if this is like I want to look under every stone kind of thing, or
the,
like
the cinematic universe it belongs to, like those sorts of elements.
feel-
I
feel
thought
like
this was
more what
broader
we're
than
talking about.
because I thought we talked about calling this like best world building, and people thought that was too narrow.
so like if we wrap all that stuff in, I think I would feel more comfortable leaving Horizon on here just for now until we kind of
Yeah, I don't think Horizon's
Hold
like an
what that
immediate
is.
takeoff.
like they're. If we talk about Nier, like I really disliked interacting mechanically
totally.
with that world.
Like, getting around in Nier fucking
like
sucks.
talk about invisible walls. Like that
Yeah.
thing was like there are open windows that you just jump up against and they block you out, but then there's like an open door underneath that you just like can run in. Like all that stuff I thought was terrible, but the fiction stuff was really fun. Or I really liked how they kind of try to tie some of that in, like you said, with the achievements or like the map stuff,
Yeah.
and like I like that stuff a lot, but this was a open up a box, there's an empty MMO, and like let's write our story
Yeah,
here.
it's
world.
also I think that game is not good looking. Like I don't know how
Yeah.
much that's factoring in it too.
I think some of the
I
art
think
design is really good,
I-
but the
I think
technical
80
execution of a
right,
lot of it.
it's like a lot
80%
of like
of it.
empty concrete buildings.
They are-
that you have to like run up a million flights,
Yeah,
and it's
I'm
like
with you.
okay,
I
this is
think
so boring.
in-
like
in-
I don't care about this at all.
in terms of environments, like the bunker and the underground stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe one other thing.
I thought the forest
carnival is kind of cool.
Like those are the carnival. Like those are maybe the three good looking.
I think all in all,
towers okay, but
tower.
everything else in that game, environment wise,
no
looks
good.
bad.
They are squeezing so much out of very limited assets, and that's like the kindest thing I can say about that.
I think we should remove Nier.
I think in that case, I'm willing to let it go. I do think that the way they tie, like you said, that lore and that story into just sort of like all the little corners of that world is kind of cool, and I don't mind some of the limitations they apply to it, but I think that there are other games where the actual world part of it I had a way better time exploring.
I feel like I don't know what this category is anymore.
So the thing that I feel like I'm coming to is like if you say a game is purely in here because of the world building that it does, like we have best story, which is kind of where that belongs.
Yeah.
So like if
it's not though. I wouldn't necessarily
this was originally seemed to be pitched as like a world, not necessarily a world I want to live in, but a world that seems like realized enough.
Fleshed
and
out.
It seems fleshed out. It seems like a place where you want to visit or something. It seems like
I want to experience everything it has to offer.
I want to be there and be in it and like see it up close and travel around it myself. Like I've seen it in this video game, but like it's so it captivated me that it seems like a real location.
Well, it's like the thing I would say about Nier is that like it's full of bombed out buildings that are empty and lifeless, but that's because it's a torn up city.
Yeah,
thousands of years after the fact.
the way that translates into just mechanically interacting with it is not good.
But like you're right, but I don't think that's like that to me is not this category at all.
I think
like,
for me,
mechanically interacting with it doesn't seem like a factor here.
I think Nier,
that's why I'm trying to figure out like what is this.
So I think for me, Nier doesn't deliver on both of those, right? Like I think there's a story in Nier and the characters in Nier are very good.
Okay, but what is what is this category?
So I think the way the environment helps tell that story is not like I think I think it hinders some of that by being so monotonous and not having you be able to explore that world, not in a way that like Horizon like has you like fall through the ground into these areas that like add to that storytelling. Like Nier
is a static diorama that you occasionally,
it takes me out of that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, you have this iron gate that I can easily jump over in Nier. That's like you're going to make me push this dumb block out of the way, which is like I'm a super killing robot. Like make me jump over this thing. But you've just destroyed some of this lore that you're trying to build here.
I think even outside of that, Nier,
I don't like factoring that into.
I guess I don't know. This muddy. I feel like this issue got way muddier because I'm looking at it in terms of like, oh man, like of course it is a bombed out city. Of course it is all this like torn up shit because it is the ruins of another civilization, and they've carved out new areas in it because the machines have built their village, and the copied city exists for this reason.
I just think none of those are good.
Right. I feel like
but the stuff that's fine. And if that's the reason we take it off, we take it off. I'm not saying it's on here. I'm saying, what is this category? Because that's the argument I would listen to. Like not being able to jump over a wall feels way less.
I think you could do both. I'm not saying it has to just be that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm saying that like
the best
when it
worlds
starts,
do both.
I'd say when it starts to detract from that, when when you have not taken into account how your character interacts in this world. Like you can have a gorgeous world and have your
like
character
in Zelda
not
when you climb a tower, like that's the physical act of you climbing this tower, and then you get to the top, and it's this beautiful landscape.
And there's also the sort of cartography of looking around and marking things that you want to go do. Like I think all that stuff factors in.
Like I am probably the biggest fan of Nier, at this table, and the thing I will say is that the parts of that world that I really enjoyed exploring and the parts that I really wanted to interact with, a lot of that was me going, yes, this is good. Boy, it could have been better.
But then the thing I would say about Zelda is like, man, the like environment is really amazing, but boy, the story and like the world and lore they fill it with sure is nothing.
So yeah, I mean, I was just using an example of like how interacting with the world. I agree that Zelda is not necessarily my favorite world either, but
I think Zelda's like an inverse argument where I fall on like it's kind of they interact with the world very well, but it's barren.
But see, when I think about this category, I think of like that Zelda case being absolutely a case for removal, but like the Nox against Nier don't line up with what I think this category is. I feel like we need to talk about this less about these two games and more about what are we actually doing.
Yeah, I think we have opposite impressions of what this category is.
I thought it was like, here's a world you want to explore.
Yeah, I came into this feeling like this was focused on physical spaces and how you interact with them, because I'm super interested in how games use
But see, that's the thing, is that like part of those physical spaces is creating world design and interesting elements to those worlds that you want to interact with. It's beyond just basic mechanics. Like in the case of like Assassin's Creed Origins, which is honestly the game that most inspired me to like suggest this category. Like mechanically, it's just Assassin's Creed. You know, it's the way you interact with any Assassin's Creed world. But the way they have designed their rendition of Egypt, the way they have poured detail into the environment design, and just like every little corner, like even if I don't care about the missions that I'm doing, I want to go find every fucking question mark on that map and see what it is and find out what's going on. And 5 times out of 10, it's a bandit camp, but that's fine.
It's inviting, yeah,
because it's very inviting. It's lovely, and on top of that, the way they tie the fiction into that stuff, like the stuff that's going on politically in the world and all of that, like I think it all ties together incredibly well.
Yeah, so I think. For me, it's like, does the world become a character in this game
or a story? I think abstractly, like this is like best story in the case of like a world. Do you know what I mean? Like
environmental storytelling,
in a way, but like not actually coming through.
Like Nier actively was pushing me against exploring that world because I was getting frustrated and like it was monotonous in it. Where at least in Zelda, I wanted to reach other places because it was like more fun to engage in it, and they rewarded me for that.
Yeah,
I feel like Nier just was like, stop looking around, stop poking around in this world.
Yeah, but I also feel like
go to the terminal, you'll get your email.
The case could be made that is a form of world building.
Totally, but it didn't feel intentional. Yeah. It felt like because they ran out of money.
Sure. I also feel like I've played games with like bombed out buildings and like post-apocalyptic stuff, and it's
like Battlegrounds.
Yes, even Battlegrounds feels so much more rich. Granted, this is like such a longer period of time away, so like there would be less human stuff, whatever. But it still felt unintentionally barren.
Mm. Yeah, like Nier never had that like elephant graveyard kind of thing of like, oh wow, what is, you know what I mean? Like
they never put a skeleton and a book next to each other in just the right way.
Like kind of seriously though, like you never had that like, open this door, like what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And like
Nier literally has walk through a door and what the hell is this?
Which one?
It's machines fucking.
Well, there is that
but that's
one.
Not the environment. Those are the characters.
That's more storytelling.
Like if you had, if you had texted me though, and we're just like, did you go see this part? Like it's hidden off in this other thing that's like you open this door. I mean, it does have some of that stuff.
Like there are cool hidden things in there. Like there's that sequence. There's the whole Romeo's and Juliet's thing, which we'll talk about probably later on. Like there are those are those little hidden pockets of cool shit in that game. And I think exploring that stuff is worthwhile, but the game is actively pushing against you in some ways, doing a lot of that. And I will assign a degree of intentionality to that. But there is also just hardcore limitations to what that game is doing.
Cut it and keep going, and maybe like as you keep discussing it, I will understand this category, because I'm still just like, what the fuck are we doing? I'm like a minute away from saying stop recording so we can have this conversation and figure out what we're doing here, because
I think we need to talk about it some more as we go down these, as we go down this list here. So let's do another one.
I think Breath of the Wild is getting shortchanged a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I do too.
Because I think there is a really good sense of mystery in that world. Like there are large swaths of that land that are just fields and things like that. But you mentioned the elephant graveyard thing. There's that huge like battlefield of all those guardians that have been like destroyed or deactivated. Yeah. Like that's really interesting. There are islands you see in the distance, and you say, I wonder what's over there. And you float there, and it's Eventide Island. It's like, oh, what is this thing I stumbled upon?
I've never been so surprised so many times by things I found in the world.
Yeah. Or you turn a corner like at night and you see the dragons. Like, what the fuck?
It is a game about exploration.
The time that when I stumbled on the Eventide Island, I was just like, fucking, what the fuck is this?
It was like 5 in the morning, and I DM'd Austin. I was like, have you gone to the fucking island? Like, it's incredible.
Like, there's so much to find in that game. It's so intriguing.
I also feel like the richness of that world makes the story feel more full. Like, I know that the story is definitely lacking in a lot of places, but because the world is so good and there's so many different layers to it and so many different cool characters, I think, in it, I think that makes the game feel much richer.
Also, like I think you have to give credit to how open and undirected it is. The fact that you can go, if you're good enough, you can go beat the game an hour after you start it. Like it's everything is optional in that game.
Yeah, I do think Zelda rewards poking around.
Yeah,
a lot
it
more.
rewards exploration in a way that most open world games have gotten completely away from.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if it actually makes good on like a lot of these things that you see off in the distance.
It does, and like even small things, like the map is so huge, and you'll see a tiny little detail. Like I was probably like 70 hours in when I saw that little heart lake. And I was like, what is this lake that's shaped like a heart? And then I traveled there, and there's a payoff there. And it's really, really cool. It's not just these huge, graveyards and things like that. There are tiny little things that if you explore, it rewards you with something cool.
And the best part about that to me is that they don't try to hold the player's hand by giving them a lot of icons on the map to go hunting for. It's just like you are like you will see the geography of the world, and it is up to you to find it on your own at your own pace.
And it feels like you are the one that found it. You didn't follow a waypoint or something. And just the little challenges you can make for yourself. It's like, well, look at this huge thing. I don't know if I can climb that much, but if you're climbing around the edge and walking on these little cliffs and stuff, and you make it.
All the little nooks and crannies with the Korok puzzles and stuff.
Like the Korok seeds would be the most rote thing in any other game, and I think they're more interesting than like the main missions of a lot of open world games.
Yeah, I burned out real fast on trying to have to collect those.
I only get them when I notice them.
Yeah.
The thing is, there are so many of them, and enough of them are different enough.
I just didn't like that it was tied to like my inventory slots, where I was like, at some point though, it was just like that whole system became kind of a problem.
That system sucks, but I like the way that they exist in the world. I just wish it was.
So this one we're talking about purely in a playground kind of.
I was just drawn into that world, and I wanted to explore every part of that
like
map.
Calling it a playground has always felt like the essence of this category to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just still
that's
trying
what
to
I came into this
figure out
thinking that this was.
What level we're talking about. Because like if you go into something like Wolfenstein, I think walking around in those environments as a playground sucks.
I agree. I don't think Wolfenstein should.
But I think the atmosphere, the lore, the storytelling, and the way the environments are modeled to reflect that is very good.
Right.
But I think the exploration in those is abysmal.
I think that's why it shouldn't be on here, because I think that those things need to go hand in hand for this category. Totally. I think you kind of need that full thing.
I added that too, and go ahead and remove it because I still have no idea what you're talking about.
I think
because Wolfenstein is another one where I'm like, every single thing you read in that game, every gun and tech thing you look at is fascinating.
I really
and
think that all goes to storytelling, though. Like that is all in service. That all rolls up into creating a world that is the backdrop of the story that they're telling.
I'm still trying to get a feel for it too. So this is all right. If we're saying lore, and traditional world building, that stuff would be grouped into is storytelling, and this is more
like that stuff's not story though. There's an explicit story told in Wolfenstein, and then there's a world around it.
Well, I mean,
I'm talking about the world around it.
Games are a weird medium for traditional storytelling because they're non-linear and things happen at different paces for different people. They're not like authored in the same way. But
I also just don't think that like in this case, the world around it, like the way they have designed it for players to interact with, is actually that
great.
But
see that is you engaging me on what I think this category is, though. Are you saying that's what this category is?
I mean, I think that's a big factor in it. Yes, I don't want to do things like if I don't like enjoy walking around and doing things in the game as much as I do just sitting there and watching the story happen. Then I think that's a factor.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like exploration
because he was saying the opposite of what you were saying in terms of whether this counts or not.
I don't think so. You're talking about how satisfying it is to move around and
poke around and see stuff in that game. I don't actually enjoy it.
We're moving. Keep going.
So you're saying it's like best exploration?
Kinda, yeah.
I mean, it's not even just best exploration.
Exploring the world is how you are introduced to the world, and so that like. I mean, imagine best story, right? And it's like, well, am I reading a bunch of audio to straight text logs, or are there characters? I'm over here. Like how the story is delivered is part of how good the story is. How you explore the world.
Let me try and give like two fairly like opposite seeming games in here that I think both qualify for what I'm talking about here. Like I mentioned Assassin's Creed, exploring that world, just seeing everything there is to see, and not just from like a visual perspective, but just like poking around every little nook and cranny, finding these old tombs, like just, you're in that game, you're essentially picking through the remnants of an old kingdom that has, come under occupation by the Greeks and the Romans. So there's like all these different clashing cultures in there, and there's just so many different ways they apply that to the core act of just being in that game and experiencing the open world. The other side of that is something like Night in the Woods, which is a very contained, story-driven experience, but it's all tied together with this rendition of a small sort of Appalachian town in, like coal mining country. And they're, just from a visual perspective, I really like it a lot. But they also encourage you to just go around to every part of the town every single day, interacting with different characters, finding different little things in there to sort of, to tease out the story further. And that's not like, it's not an open world game. Like, it's not a game where the hub area really has much factor into the larger plot. But it's such a neat and I think very honest rendition of that kind of town and that kind of environment. And I thought it was a joyous thing each day to start new and talk to the characters that I knew and just hang out there.
So, most interesting world to interact with?
Sure.
I mean, I do think there is an aspect of some of that lore and storytelling within the world. Not necessarily, I don't think that's the main part of this category, but I do think something like Wolfenstein, I can see why it's in here, but I don't necessarily think it would be in top 3 because the way you interact with the world, the way you move around in the world sort of holds you back from all that lore that you're finding. So I think that it's not something that's like, oh, this is disqualified because it doesn't even count. I think it's more just like we can make an argument.
And I'm looking at this as like the Nazis built a fucking weird big animal robot. Yeah. And then there are a bunch of newspaper reports about what happened in the end of the war and who nuked what, and I'm looking at all of that stuff.
And that stuff is super interesting to me.
That
I want to learn more about
that world further and further.
Right, but then once you get to that world, I just don't think there's anything there.
Well, I would argue most interesting world to interact with, the submarine in Wolfenstein 2 is a lot of the really good filler for that story happens when you're walking around that submarine talking to people, taking on some of those
I was going to say the U-boat is like the one positive argument for that game.
Yeah,
in this context.
Like, the missions outside of there, I found like trying to find the collectibles a bit of a chore.
Like, it's discouraging.
It's bad.
But just remember walking around New York, those broken down buildings.
That's the worst part.
The game has got some not great level
But that
design.
submarine stuff is actually
that is really good.
if this is what I'm thinking this category is a very good example of like, discovery.
That is a space. That is a
Totally.
space that makes you curious about what's in it.
Like, this
Right.
pig is in here. You stumble on this conversation.
You overhear conversations constantly.
But also, I would say that like the idea that New York has been nuked and you get there, and of course it's super fucked up, and it's not, it's not necessarily gonna be a fun thing to explore, but the idea of like you've got to get up high because the radiation, you can't stay down low in New York. That's like a fascinating detail.
Yeah, I like
of that world.
But
right?
I think if I'm trying to understand this the way that I think Alex intends or what, I think that's more of hey, the lore around that is pretty good, but the doing it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
The implementation
Right,
sucks.
Conceptually, it's good.
I didn't like that, like playing that level.
Okay.
Like,
All right. Yeah. I just that to me that never seemed like it should be a factor in this category. Like, of
Like, if you
course,
liked it or
walking
not?
around a nuked area is going to be a negative thing.
I guess for me, it didn't feel like it was like, oh man, they made it so that this is harder for me because they want it to add to the lore of like how challenging
right.
it is to move
Like
through.
BJ
It
would have trouble with this?
Right. It felt like they want me to blow through dudes and I am just getting lost because I don't know where to go.
How do I get up to that marker?
I would say
Right,
every
exactly.
level in that game is kind
Yes.
of bland.
Or
and
like
tedious.
the one where you have to keep the coolant in your thing. Like, I found that like
God.
annoying versus
There's
like,
some frustrating stuff, but still,
Like,
you
it's a
go
cool idea.
But still, the Nazis live on
Right.
Venus.
So that is very cool.
like that's the part I would take from that in this category is they live on Venus.
Yeah.
That's fucking nuts.
So I think that part though, I can separate that into like best story parts versus like the implementation.
best moment.
The implementation of that was not fun in their
okay.
world.
No,
Where they're
all right,
like,
cut and keep going then.
Okay.
Like when I think it was you, Alex, right, that originally proposed this. Like when you first said it, I almost took this to mean like not explicitly best open world, but like trying to.
But I think open world games are definitely like the stronger entries.
That's
in
what
a
I
lot
thought
of
this category was going into it, and then but once we got here, a bunch of games that don't fit that bill started showing up.
Like, and that's the thing is, I don't necessarily think all of these are going to stay on here. Like when I look at something like Pyre, which I really love the world building they do in that game. Like I go back to the conversation we had earlier about how there maybe isn't enough exploration of it. There isn't enough like environmental change outside of the arenas.
There's not even that much visual representation of a lot of it.
Yeah, you see some cool stuff on the map with like they said, the old gods and all that kind of shit. Like I think that stuff is really good, but I don't think it's top 3 for this.
Sure. I would say the same thing for Battle Chef. Like the stuff that you do see is very good. All the like
I wish you did more in that world outside of the main town. Like
Yes.
that's the thing that maybe it is lacking.
It's a good town, but like
Yeah.
I would love to see some other locations.
But the thing that made it, I think worth considering is just the fact that they do such a good job of explaining the culture around that stuff and tying that into the world, and they never go out of their way to explain like why are there all these different races just hanging out here cooking all the time. But it's just like no, because that's the culture.
Like,
Everyone
get into
cooks.
it a little bit, which is cool. Like they talk about like the first orcish philosopher and stuff like that, and that's neat. But like there's just not enough there.
Yeah. So I think that, and I think Battle Chef and Pyre can probably go.
All right, so here's a weird one that I don't know if again we'll break this, but I think Mario and Rabbids makes very good on their premise in their world that they have developed. As you're walking around that world, everything becomes that Mario and Rabbids mishmash thing in a way that sells the concept and like makes you want to look around the world.
I agree with you. My only hang up would be that you're just looking at all of it. Like, it's all just the stuff around the
but
edges.
it's selling it.
But you're right.
It does feel a little more like a museum
so much
tour.
of it.
When I was walking through, I was not that fascinated looking at a lot of it. I was usually just like, let me just get to the next thing. I don't care about these dumb rabbit jokes.
By the time I got like halfway through World
Right.
2, it was just like, here's another underpants off to the side. Oh, that rabbit
he's
is
in a toilet.
And now the Roomba's going to say like, that guy's going to get a rash. And then you move on.
You guys just don't like comedy.
I think the most interesting parts of that are more about gameplay, where the bosses start coming out and like the weird hybrid creatures start appearing in different ways. Like I think that's the more interesting aspect of that. I think the kingdom stuff is cool, and like when you go back to the castle and like
everything's built up.
Everything's built up. I think that's kind of neat.
Like Vinny, what you're talking about maybe would also play in best style.
Yeah, it could be, but I think the world supports the game premise in a way that I think is very interesting.
I guess I don't think most of the map venues that you're actually fighting in are all that interesting.
The battlegrounds I think are not so great. It's more the superfluous stuff, like the stuff that's on the fringes.
Well, the interaction with that world, like in between the battles, where you're just like carrying a thing and putting it on a pedestal. Like I didn't think any of that
actually
was super...
strike it from that category because the way they introduce being able to move a block or dig fucking sucks in that
is
world.
bad. I don't
All
like
the
that.
out of combat stuff eventually ends up really sucking.
It really sucks, and they don't justify it with any kind of story or anything. It's just like now you can move a block.
They do a bad job with that.
That's
I don't
actually
like that.
was so annoying.
I actually feel like Tacoma is a pretty good fit here.
I do too. I think like that world felt like a real
It's
world.
very realized.
Yes, like I feel like I have seen so few games that have that sort of like, oh, I'm going to stumble into a conversation and then walk away from it, and it doesn't just feel like a timed thing. Like it felt like when I was gone from it, it was still happening.
Yeah. And the way you access everybody's crew quarters, so you go through all their personal effects, like you see all of their possessions.
Little
and
items like the little like K-pop soda, that stuff. It's just like it helps build. It ties into the story really well.
And you access a lot of computers, so you're going through people's desktops and reading their emails, and like it.
And they do a very good job of contextualizing and just writing that stuff.
Yeah.
Like it feels lived in a way that I think is incredibly important for that game's success.
Yeah,
and
I even think stuff like the zero gravity in parts and like the augmented reality stuff, like their AR interfaces and signage all over the place, like all that stuff just creates a very cohesive environment.
I thought there was something very cool about how I felt like it was so fun to explore the space, and it was clearly like people left in a hurry, stuff was like falling over, like things weren't in good shape, but then you saw them interacting with it as though it was fine, which I think is really cool and interesting, and like it felt very rich.
I think that's maybe actually my knock a little bit against What Remains of Edith Finch, which I put on here late, is that like I think from a pure set design perspective, that game is awesome, but it is not terribly interactive in that way. Like you aren't really exploring for like a ton of like you can't really pick through that environment in the way that you could with like a Fulbright game. And it is, as a museum piece, it's fascinating. Like it is cool to walk through and see all those different vignettes and stuff, but like the amount of interactive detail in that world is maybe a little bit lacking.
I really loved Edith Finch a lot, but I felt like some of the rooms felt so sort of like on the nose of like, this druggie loves a fucking, I don't know, like a mushroom tie-dye fabric on his wall or
neon
whatever.
pot leaf or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like it was a little too like, I get it, okay.
Yeah, it's very precious in that way.
A little cliched.
It's a little bit, but I mean, it's again from an art design perspective, it was a fascinating thing for the couple of hours that they give you. But I don't necessarily think it's top 3.
Do we knock Splatoon at all for being pretty much the world of Splatoon 1?
I'm not. I don't. I really like the world of Splatoon. I think they add some stuff like like I mean the new vendors like Krusty Sean and stuff. I think that like you learn more about the world in the plot of the game, which I think was interesting with like Callie or Marie going missing. I forget who, and then you kind of learn more about like their life as a celebrity and like what it means, and kind of puts everything into another context. But it also is very much like the
it's an escalation of Splatoon, but
it has a DJ Octopus.
But I could also see maybe it's better for best style.
Yes, I think it's a better fit for that.
Yeah,
agreed.
Another one I'm really split on is Cuphead.
I think Cuphead is. I love Cuphead, but I also think the world is so fascinating and interesting, and I think each level you go into, it feels like there's so much richness there, and like I guess I appreciate maybe it's not. I don't know, because even like in the overworld, like there are so many moments of like I can talk to people, I can find like that fourth like barbershop pole guy, and then they're back together, and I can like find coins hidden in the world, and like I felt like there was more to do in the overworld than I would expect.
It just feels a little disjointed to me. Like some of the like there doesn't like each of the worlds has their own theme, and you like so like the second world is kind of a carnival theme. There's like a roller coaster guy, but then like there's a dragon, and there's a like. I feel like it's just kind of like we have an idea for a lot of cool bosses. Let's stick an overworld on it because we need it. And
Okay.
I think the
it's bad.
closest it gets to like a cohesive like world is at the end when you're doing that whole thing against King Dice, and there's all those different like kind of casino smoky, drinky themed things.
But I think I could have stripped out the overworld and just had that original mechanic of turning the next page. Like here's the next fight, and, like turn the next page. Here's the next fight. Like the overworld was neat, but like.
Right.
I
guess
don't think
for
it
me,
added that much.
like, sure, I can sort of see that maybe they don't seem as sort of jointed or in the same sort of theme, but I feel like they all felt like they're from the same world.
Definitely, it is cohesive,
yes.
but I think that's like a style thing.
Okay.
Like they nail all of that.
I like it, but I can appreciate that maybe it doesn't fit in this.
Yeah, in the overworld stuff, it does seem kind of like it's we got to put some stuff here to make people want to explore it. So, we hit a coin behind this tree. Oh, here's these
It's all
guys.
like Mario 3, like just kind of like.
Hey, there's the axe guy. Go talk to him. Here's a couple little guys across the map.
And we're not saying it's bad. It's just I just don't think it completely.
And they definitely didn't have to do it. Like Vinny said, I could see that game being just a series of fights, but like it's neat that they have this.
Like on your next episode.
Yeah.
It looks cool.
And it's got the best music.
Cool. It's got very good music.
I think Observer, the world is dense and amazing.
Mm-hmm. What is the like format of that game?
You're basically in a very closed environment. Okay. Like you're in like a hotel or a apartment complex. And it's like a murder mystery.
Okay. Did you ever go outside the building?
Yeah, a little bit, not far, but there's like a little courtyard, basically.
Okay.
And there's towards the later game, you kind of do a bit more.
It takes place in your mind, man.
Right.
You're mind
I will
jacking.
say you like go in and out of people's minds, and that's sort of where you kind of leave.
Remember that party scene?
The apartment. Oh yes. Yeah. Like I think that's where the world gets very cool.
That's fine. I mean, like Tacoma is a very small space too. I don't.
Sure.
Inside your mind, man. That's a big space.
I also feel like going around the world and Observer, I did feel like I was discovering stuff. Like you would stumble on weird
doors,
stuff. You'd knock on doors, and everyone's apartment felt very different, and like that world does feel very rich and like dark.
Yeah, I think Observer is like probably one of the best things about it is the world.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Absolver?
Yeah, that's a really cool stylistic world. I think it's very minimalist.
It has that cool thing of like being a huge. It is an open world, like it is.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, they don't really delve into like the background of that world. There's not a lot going on there, and they don't really entice it all that much. I just think it's a really cool series of environments, really. Yeah. But I don't think it hangs.
Okay.
I would maybe take Yakuza 0 off this list just for the same reason that we took Splatoon off, and that this is the same basic environment that they have been running through most of that series. The difference is the time period and also the part where you go to, I believe it's Osaka, where Majima is hanging out, and so there's some different stuff there. And I mean, I think they do a great job of making that little slice of Tokyo and Osaka feel like living and breathing, and it's a cool place to hang out. I just it's the thing they've been doing in Yakuza for a long time.
Yeah. Okay.
As much as I love Odyssey, for this category, I think there are individual worlds that are really, really cool and have cool themes and everything, but it is very much like, okay, this is completely separate from this thing, which is separate from this thing. Like, it's fun to see what the next place is going to look like and everything, but
it's not cohesive that way.
No. I mean, intentionally so.
Yeah,
but for this category, I don't think it really fits
What
there.
about the moon?
The moon's awesome.
The moon is fucking.
I turned into a frog on the moon.
It's kind of fun to just jump around and poke around the corners.
Oh, 100%. If we're just talking like mechanically, it's great to just run around and look for moons.
I don't mind that it has a bunch of like. I feel like that's part of the game is that there are all these different places.
And
that
using
does
the
not bother
mechanics
me.
to get around like to weird places in that world, I feel like is very intentional.
That's entirely the point.
Yeah. I just feel like when I look at the breadth of the whole game, I can't look at like this is the feeling of the world of Mario Odyssey because it's all like here's the feel of the Luncheon King, here's the feel of this thing,
small discrete
little buckets. Yeah,
totally.
But there's some through lines that like
there are.
You know, you find like Lakitu fishing, and there's like, I don't know. I feel like even some of the individual worlds would be on the same level as other games' entire worlds.
I feel like the draw of this game is the world. Is going around, throwing your hat on like whatever you can, and just being like, what can I do here? I can do so much. And like you discover so much stuff in all these weird little corners. Like, I think the world is...
And like
I'm not ready to cut that.
Trying to take characters in places that they're not supposed to go.
Yeah, on the mechanical gameplay side of things, I think it's so much fun to poke around and explore. I'm just talking about like the overall theme. And
I really agree with you on that.
But like if we start getting back into like is it a lore thing versus like
no, I'm not talking about lore.
It's just about like coherent design.
Yeah, I think he's saying it's less cohesive because
but I
of
feel
the way
like that's
it's
more
split up.
style then.
But that's like it's extremely intentional. Like,
it is, and
it would be
kind of pays
way
off.
worse for it if like
totally. Like I don't want it to all look like here's the lava thing and the ice thing and it all looks the same.
I don't know, dude. If they made a Mario game with the world as connected and sprawling as Zelda, I would be all fucking about it.
And I would also
sounds incredible.
It's not just that it isn't cohesive; it's that there are definitely elements of those worlds where I was like, yeah, I'm done here. I don't really want to go back
I started poking around the Mushroom Kingdom last night, and I was just like, oh, you want me to do the sheep thing again? Like, oh, you're gonna make me do this thing again? Like,
that's definitely fair.
I think one way it does kind of pay off, like the weird like disconnectedness of the worlds, is at the end. I think we talked about it before when all the other characters from different worlds are all like hanging out and like seeing like a new donk guy next to like a talking fork. Right. Like, I think that is really funny. Like drawing attention to like these places are all weird and look different.
When the tourism industry of Mario Odyssey opens up, it does become kind of cool.
And that's why it's so cool when you see this photorealistic dragon. And it's like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, I like that the game allows that to happen. But for this category specifically,
sure. I think for me, like more of just like the reward for poking around is another fucking moon, and then I'm just like,
I like that.
Like,
Moons are good.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm okay. I got plenty. I can just go to the store and buy these now. Like, I would rather have a cool like piece of like world building.
Oh, a cool newspaper.
Yes, a cool newspaper that tells you about this flying fortress.
I will say it's a million times better than like look at the art style of all the new Super Mario Brothers games where it's all that exact same feel and everything. Like, I would much prefer like all these weird different worlds than just like this art style on everything.
I just think there are other games on this list I feel much stronger about.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay. I love that world. I'm like truly surprised because I think that world is so fun to explore. I think that's what that game has going for it is the world.
I'm kind of with you.
Yeah.
I think, but like I do think like just the reward. Like I'm just tired of finding moons.
That's fair. I also think it's a little like vapid, maybe. But I don't think that's necessarily a knock against this category.
I want more of the political superstructure of the, kingdoms and how they go to war.
I want my Koopa politics simulator.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to cut it. Like I think
we don't have to cut it yet.
So I think that's what makes this game interesting.
We don't have to yet.
I would take stuff over it.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to hang here, but
sell me on Lost Legacy, I guess.
I don't know if I could. I don't know. That big open space is pretty awesome.
The open space is great.
There's like a lot of stuff in that game that surprised me with just how cool it was. Like that big lady thing in the
statue thing with the water that pours out of her hands.
Run up her hands.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I guess quite a bit of that game is very, very Uncharted.
Yes, like the train, even like the big statue. We've seen stuff like climbing on big statues and stuff before. It is undeniably cool as hell. It's just we've kind of seen a lot of that in Uncharted.
But the big hub, the place you spend like 3 hours driving the Jeep around, doing little side things, and then the story sends. This is something else that games don't do enough of. That I think Austin wrote a piece on Waypoint recently, and I was like, fucking yes! Like you're talking about like changes in times of day and changes in seasons, you know, like implying passage of time. is something the games are usually really bad at, and that game is really good at it because
Naughty Dog's great. I think like Last of Us, when all of a sudden it's like, fall, winter. It's like it feels totally
so
different.
you spend like 3 hours in that big area driving the Jeep around doing stuff, and it's all bright and sunny, and then you find the lost city and go do a bunch of stuff there, and a bunch of really dramatic things happen, and as you come out of there, some really bad tension erupts between the two main characters, and just at that moment, you re-enter that space, and clouds are gathering, and a rainstorm starts. And like it all feels very tonally appropriate to what's going on. Like they use that stuff incredibly well.
It's very well done, but I don't think it's anything different than like what Uncharted has traditionally done. Outside of that open world, which was different.
Right. Yeah. I think it's an awesome, cool world, but like I think there are maybe cooler ones on here.
Well,
all right, now we're kind of getting down into it.
We weren't already?
I mean, more so.
All right, so cut Uncharted.
I think so.
Cut Wolfenstein.
I don't know if I feel now that we've talked about this category.
Dude, I fucking hate that space.
I do, but I think the submarine stuff and the stuff that they flesh out in the environments that you go to, not necessarily exploring them. Now that we've talked about this category a bunch, I feel better having this on here. Like if we've gotten a bit away better.
I think for me, I think that there are a lot of cool parts in the world of Wolfenstein. I think the submarine's really cool. I think Venus is pretty cool. I think the idea of Venus is cooler than actually the environment itself.
Venus is actually just a military base.
Yeah,
right.
It's actually really
it's not like a great part of the game.
Right. But I think like
But I'm not.
There are so many bad parts of the world that I don't like.
Yeah, definitely. And so, like, I'm with you on that. Like, again, I think some of that exploration in those places is abysmal, but I think that you get to kind of explore the house that he was in. Like, they take you to these different places that range around that are not just like underground military installations. That I do feel like Wolfenstein 1 was very locked in like crumbling concrete shoot up, and like in like kind of
sure.
I mean, that game was a lot about concrete.
Yeah, but
anyway.
like when you say going back to his childhood home. Like that exposes the problems with the messy definition of this category, but like it's what you discover.
Can someone write a paragraph that says what this category is? Can anyone write a clear paragraph?
I could definitely write what I think it is,
and like because that's.
Based on what I've heard,
I've said like 3 times what I think this is.
Yeah,
I
think I've heard a lot of conflicting.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of, like the conversation about Mario Odyssey feels like even further away from.
Yeah, that's
what
why I was saying
seemed like it was.
That's why I was saying it doesn't belong here.
Like I still think about this category in terms of like the implications of what you're seeing, and it's not about like, oh man, if I hadn't gotten lost in this environment, that would have been different. It literally is more like...
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Crazy
like,
that this environment exists, period.
When you go to Mesquite in Wolfenstein, it's not like, oh, wow, this dilapidated old house is amazing to see. It's what the cutscenes there reveal about the story.
Right.
Like, that's the value of it.
And also, but I also think about it in the world in terms of, like, the setting, in terms of, like, an America where, plenty of people... sided with the Nazis after the war, and it started turning people in, and
so that's where I would agree. Like, I think
that to me is the world. It's not like
that's not what I think this category is.
But
that is story related stuff. It's all the backdrop of the story that is being told.
I would just say the difference there is they at least let you touch it for a little bit and explore it a little bit. Like whether or not that is like a fun experience to run around in it. Like it is nice that they set this world up and let you touch the things that are in it for a little bit. Like walk down Main Street, right?
It's super hard to quantify that in this. We can't compare a lot of these games based on a mechanic like that.
Like and can I be real? Like I think they didn't do as good of a job with that as they could have. Like the thing that disappointed me most about Wolfenstein 2 was that you go to that Main Street and you do that and you get a few fun little vignettes with that, and then. The Oberkommando level is fine, but there's just nothing that interesting. And then they never really go back to anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, if you're saying it's not good enough, but I think dismissing
it... I feel like the previous dismissals of it were more like...
It doesn't count here.
Like this doesn't count.
They do those things.
It's not that doesn't count. It was not good enough, I think, is what
it has nothing to do with it not qualifying. It has everything to do with the fact that I don't think it delivers on that stuff.
If we're going to debate Wolfenstein on the merits, like that space of Main Street is incredibly linear and constrained.
Yeah, like if you want to,
it feels sort of barren. I realize everyone's
that's the thing, though, is you are stopping and looking at every storefront and going, "Fuck,
I'm not."
You should have, because it's fucking.
I felt like I looked at a lot of it.
I did, but there just wasn't enough of it.
I know.
Like there's some great stuff there, but it's very limited.
I would say there's the Main Street stuff. There's the submarine stuff, which I think is kind of incredibly fleshed.
It's the best part of that stuff.
Yeah, that is probably the best one. I think some of the combat arenas are not are not fun to poke around in. Like, there's not a lot of stuff going on there. I think the house was cool that they did that moment of letting you kind of poke around in there, and like, you know, you do the memory stuff. It's a little, some of it's gimmicky, but it works for what they're trying to tell the story of. I think there are places in there that do this job that we're talking about here, and I don't want to disqualify because it doesn't. We could talk about whether it fulfills it better than some of these other things, but it's definitely in there.
Because I'm thinking about this in terms of like, there's the story, but there's the world the story takes place in, and the setting of that world. And like, you're right that the world is kind of a factor of the story, but it's separate enough. I would like to think we're rewarding the separate part of that, and not just, you know, BJ's story is separate. We have a story category for that.
Well, that's
but
the thing,
world it is set in. But I'm only making this about Wolfenstein because that's a clear delineation to me between the story of the game and the setting and world of the game.
So are you saying like the optional stuff around the edges, the little things you can find if you do poke around? Because like there is the straight path that you go through and the cutscenes
like
you see.
Stuff that you look at. Even if it is a straight path through, like the nature of that world.
Like finding
what it is showing you.
Finding the beds in the like hidden part where the Nazis were hanging out, like finding the little bedrooms in there, like where they were sleeping in the laundry area, that terrible level that I hate. Again, I don't like a lot of the level design, but like you do stumble into places where like, oh, like you find a journal in here and like people were sleeping in here, and how did they survive in here for
Venus is a shitty part of that game. It is a bad gameplay sequence. But the thought of it, the visual design of it, like, I think that's the stuff that I would consider for this category.
Like going into the again, the submarine is very good. Like going into the hangar in the sub, and like just being able to walk around sometimes for no good reason, and like being able to interact with, like, well, in my case, Fergus on the thing, and doing all the little quests in there. I think I
don't understand the disconnect in the sense that like all that stuff rolls up into story to me. Like whether it is part of, quote, the story or not, it is giving context to the events of the story. Whether it functions on a narrative level or a thematic level or whatever it is, like it all is cumulatively contributing to, here is what this game is saying, here is what's happening in it, knowing these things on the side.
I don't think it's a disconnect. I think you can rate that from like a 1 to 10 and be like, is it doing a good job at it? But I don't want to disqualify and say that Wolfenstein is not doing that.
I think there can be a little bit of overlap between this and the other category, but my
Tacoma
impression
is doing the same thing. Tacoma is adding to the story.
You could tell BJ's story with way less set dressing, and it would still be that story.
Like, what's the difference between the sub stuff and Tacoma?
Well, no, that's the thing, is that we're not saying there is necessarily a difference.
We said flat out the U-boat is the one thing that would qualify Wolfenstein in this category.
So then how is Mario Odyssey in this at all?
It shouldn't be.
Wait,
why?
That absolutely isn't.
I don't understand why that's a question.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Mario Odyssey hits it on a level of, like, you're going around using the mechanics of the game and the environment of the game in a good marriage, right? Like they made a world that's fun to explore using the mechanics of the game and have you poking around in places.
I also
like
thought the theme
Mario
of all the not all the worlds. I thought the theme of some of the worlds. I thought the Luncheon Kingdom was a cool realized world. It's like there's this they're cooking up stew on a volcano, so you see this like big volcano and there's a pot on it, and you kind of learn more about this world. They have this big festival where they cook. Like the story kind of comes through. I think
that makes more sense than I like poking around for moons.
Sure.
That feels like not what this category is.
There's a long list of why I like the world,
but I don't know. Like,
that's one.
I think you learn the same thing over and over about Mario, which is like, this world is wacky. Like which is cool. That's fine, but there's not a lot of texture there.
You can get that dismissive about all. Like,
what else
U-boat is dense. The people on the U-boat have like concern.
They're sad.
They're sad. Like, the robots in Nier are sad.
Like, but what do you get out of the Forest Kingdom that you don't get out of the Luncheon Kingdom
I think
or
if
the
we
Moon
wanna...
Kingdom? Like, it's a weird fucking game, and I love it for that.
Can we back up a little bit? Is this category terrible? Should we cut this category?
No, I don't think so. Like, I think we're all getting really weirdly hung up on these like very literal definitions of a thing that is not intended to be.
That's why I say I need someone to write down what this is intended to be, because I think different people are arguing different points that are completely on opposite sides of what we think a world is.
I think we're spiraling out of...
and that's what I'm saying. Like, should we cut this because I have no idea what we're even talking about anymore?
No,
this category, I thought this category came about because of The Witcher 3 and Horizon and Zelda.
It totally
and Assassin's Creed Origins and all of the games in which place has now become like a character in the game that is a vehicle for conveying what the game is
And
about.
and in the case of something like Wolfenstein, I'm not like when we're talking about it, we're not trying to disqualify it because
Right.
we don't think the game does a thing that would ever qualify for it. I'm saying it's not as good at doing those kinds of things as the other games on this list.
Like that's the thing though, is like people are saying that now, but when it was first cut, that was not the argument anyone
I've
was
said
making.
like 3 different ways since we started this. I thought this was basically best open world. Like it's about the place you're in and how you interact with it. I've said that since the very beginning of this thing.
I've kind of been,
And in some
going on
cases,
But that's not what we're
too.
saying.
What?
I mean, it's,
Yeah, that's not-
Well, I guess. I'm sorry.
I am so
I
confused.
guess when
Exactly.
I guess when you say open world, you have to then define that,
Right,
Because
because,
open
like-
world has a very gameplay mechanic-y
Like-
thing,
like
right?
Night in the
That's why
Woods-
I didn't want to actually explicitly say best open world
Yes.
because that is like 6 games this
Like
year.
the submarine on Wolfenstein is not an open world.
not
game.
not
Right.
as we understand the term.
That's
right.
Yeah, so it gets
Like-
confusing.
Like I
when
didn't
you
want this
use-
to be too
And
intentionally narrow.
when we talk about Night in the Woods, like I agree with what I thought this category was. That yes, best world, absolutely. But the things you talk about when you talk about why it is, I feel like you would write off as that's part of the story.
Yeah.
I think that could be an argument made to not have Night in the Woods in here. I think I agree with that.
Wait, no.
Then what is this
No?
category? Because like
Okay.
that's
Maybe
like
I
that's
I think
again,
the world
like,
of
that's,
Night in the Woods is amazing. And
I haven't played that one, so
I think
didn't
world
want to weigh in
building
on that.
definitely ties into it.
Because I think the problem is so many of these definitions have so many different meanings. Like when you talk about world, you could literally be talking about the physical space you're walking in, or you can be talking about the lore of the world. So like
The space was to me the biggest component.
The
of this
physical
category.
Yeah,
to me, the
for
lore of
me-
the world was
Right.
the,
So I
the
think-
only thing
I
we were talking
just
about.
considered that as part of.
I think
story more than anything.
again, if the lore of the world is built into that space and it is an aspect of it that you enjoy engaging with and exploring and finding, I think that factors in.
Yes.
like I think Brad, you're talking about best environment.
to a degree, but that sounds so.
But
like,
I think that's what you're talking
I
about.
think that's a
wanna-
big part of it, but
Yeah.
it's broader than
yeah,
that.
yes,
Right.
yes.
But I think
Whereas
that-
I was
whereas
approaching
you're
this
talking
category as like that is not a factor at all.
Yeah, and
in
you're
this.
talking about like
don't
best
know.
like world, and somebody puts a Bible on your desk and says, like,
Right,
this is-
here's the
this-
brand
here's the
Bible for
yeah.
Wolfenstein.
Right. And you're talking
it's
about
not about BJ's story,
Right.
but here's the backdrop that this is set
Right.
against. Like
And you're
that's
talking
what
about the
I'm talking
environment
about.
building.
Yeah, like
Night in
I-
the Woods is not like
I've
the
felt
environment.
like-
It is here is the state of the world as it is.
Right.
Here's the tone of how these characters react to each
But
other.
that's the thing. We already have categories for characters, for story, for moment, for all these other
stuff
story-related
that's
things.
the
But
thing,
if
though.
you're
The stuff
saying,
in Night
like,
in the
you know,
Woods is
worlds
not
are a
part of the
character now
core
as well.
story of
Hold on,
Night in the
I
Woods.
completely disagree.
We're talking over each other, so let's just take it all down one notch.
The stuff about Night in the Woods that would make it a best world contender is not part of the core story of Night in the Woods. It is the flavor dialogue from like characters that are not even a factor in the story, conversations you overhear, stuff like that fleshes out the world. Like it's not like, hey, this street looks nice. Some of that stuff does look nice, but that is when we
I
talk
think-
about the world. That's what I always assume we were talking about.
But it is also the sense that it is it is very inviting to the player. Like it is the way that it invites the player to poke around the different nooks and crannies, to find all those characters, to engage, like, you know, with the astronomy teacher on the roof, and, you know, learn more about, you know, the sort of like mythology and religion of that world that you wouldn't do. It wouldn't get anywhere in the main story.
Totally, yes.
I
I
guess-
agree. And it's less about the rooftop and it's more about the astronomer on the rooftop.
Well, so
But
Because it's not about the environment, it's about the world.
But how they place those people within the world and how they invite the player to engage with that stuff, I think does matter.
And what they're saying is important, because, like, if they tell you, oh, you know, this location used to be another thing, and you're not familiar with that location, or you have never been to that area, or that area is not accessible, it is less impactful than if it's like a store you had been to or something you had been to, which plays into the physicality of this category.
So I think it's an intersection of these two, right? Between actually physically you two right here, is like you've got the brand Bible, which I think is what I kind of imagine this to be, and you've got, like, not to dismiss it, but like you've got kind of a more physical environmental thing, and somewhere that person takes the brand Bible to the level designer, and that's what we're talking about here.
The
is
marriage-
how did you take the story and incorporate it into
Yes.
the world?
Yeah,
how
is
did
it
you
also-
marry all those elements
Okay.
into a space that you want to be in?
Right,
so,
it's
like-
about enjoyment of exploring the space.
Yeah, totally.
Right, like I
Yes.
think that's why I think Wolfenstein absolutely is an important thing to discuss in this category. But I think because a lot of the exploring of that world was not enjoyable, it makes it so it's like,
not
well,
all
maybe
of these games are able to be
exploration,
explored. as
Yeah, I
well.
would say
That's why
exploration
they're-
of that world almost becomes a factor of gameplay at this point. And I
Right.
feel like that kind of can't come into
But
this.
it can if you don't design the game in a way that encourages players to go and look and find that
Right.
stuff.
Which
And
is
that's the
why-
problem I had with Wolfenstein 2 is that for all that cool detail that they put into those emails and all that other shit, like when I was engaging with the game and like just playing it, I never wanted to go looking for that stuff because just fighting through it was frustrating enough that I didn't care.
I had that problem.
That's
too.
exactly where I'm at with this
and
category.
And that's kind of what my beef with Wolfenstein 2 is. For all the good stuff that I think happened on Main Street and in the sub, there were parts where I was just looking to see if an object was shiny.
Yeah, I was more about like I'm going to clear out this area so I can go back and look for stuff because the stuff is the good part of
But
that
like,
game.
like for me, I just like at some point, like I was like,
but maybe
it's-
and maybe it doesn't qualify,
Yeah.
and I'm fine with that. Like this isn't about
Yes.
Wolfenstein,
But I just didn't want to dismiss
is-
it because of for a misunderstanding of the category.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're saying it doesn't qualify. I think we're saying maybe it's not in the top 3.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all along. I was not saying that Wolfenstein
Right.
2 is not a game that qualifies under this category. It's simply that I feel like the way that they have built that world for the player does not make it as good as several of the other games on this list.
Agreed.
okay. But I feel like disqualifying it for like, you know, the New York area isn't fun. That gets away from.
Well, no,
what
it's not. That it's not just fun. It's also kind of boring.
Or I think it doesn't. I think it
Like
doesn't.
not boring as in gameplay wise, but boring as in like it's I'm running up a building. It's like Abby was saying with Nier. It's just like I'm just kind of going through these buildings and I'm not really looking at anything because it's just all buildings.
Or the
and
way
it's
they
not
do the
like-
radiation stuff, it's like it's a neat concept, but I don't think it's executed super well.
It doesn't make
in-
It doesn't make for good gameplay.
Yeah,
but
but,
also, like, I would not put Wolfenstein in any gameplay categories.
Yeah.
like
Well,
this is the sort of stuff that when I talk about why Wolfenstein is a must-play game,
Yeah.
it's that stuff.
So, but
Well,
it's
Wolfenstein's got its own category.
But going back
for,
to my like original
that
thing,
stuff.
it's like you wrote the brand Bible and said, "Check it out, New York got bombed. There's radiation on the lower level," and then brought that to Brad, who's the level designer. I don't think Brad did a good job of making that
Brad did a
realize.
bad job.
He did,
Hey.
of making that realize for the player to be like, "Here's a fun way to implement."
I never,
that.
built,
go,
I never
Brad.
built a level before.
Well, you know,
And it shows,
And
Brad.
then that like same thing on that Mercury level, right? It's like, hey, check it out. It's so hot, you got to like
Right.
put this thing on. And then Brad made this horrible fucking mechanic where
damn,
every 2
Brad.
seconds he's just. I think Brad is just doing a
we're
very
gonna have to
bad.
have a conversation with Brad.
So like, I think there's
Yeah.
it's the same thing of like, hey, I spent fucking 3 years writing all these awesome news clips and stuff. And then you just stuck like a blinky object somewhere in a corner behind a door.
And did it next to like 17 bad guys that you're going to have to constantly repeat
And
fighting.
and then Brad could go blame the gameplay designer and be like, that's the game.
And see, and I look at this more as like, what games get the wheels spinning most about like, man, what does that mean for this?
I
What
think
does that mean for
Horizon
this?
is
What
up
does that
there.
mean for
But,
this?
like,
And
I-
yeah, I
there's
think
a reason-
Horizon does that, and I think Wolfenstein
There's a
does
reason
that.
people refer to that as environmental storytelling because it's part of telling the story. I don't understand the disconnect here.
Well, it's not a disconnect. Again, like
I'm saying,
listen,
but I bring that up because we have a best story category, which is where
Yeah.
all of that stuff belongs.
But we got here through discussion. Like we very much, and if maybe I'm misremembering, got here by dismissing Wolfenstein, saying it was not part of this category
I don't
for
think we were
other
saying
games.
that.
Abby-
I-
that is
I
no,
said
no,
it
no,
again
what
and
people
again.
said.
Nobody was saying
I
I think
said again and again,
Abby has given the best possible distillation of this category,
Yes.
which is it's about the joy of exploration.
Yes,
Like that is what this category is to me.
we were just trying to say that. None of us enjoyed the story in
but it's
Wolfenstein.
just not that, because otherwise Mario would be like one of the best of the joy of exploration.
I've been
Which I
fighting
agree
for
with.
it.
But so I don't think it's just that.
Okay. Yeah. Again. Okay. Go ahead. Cut whatever
Yeah.
you want. I
Okay.
have no dog in this fight because none of this makes any
I
sense
mean,
to
we
me.
should
No,
figure it
it
out so we're
shouldn't.
all like.
I think I
I
understand
feel
it.
like we're having two different conversations.
Vinny
here.
was
Yeah.
dead right. Vinny was dead
We were
right when he
there
said
for,
it
like,
is the
minutes.
marriage of these
Yeah.
things together into a space that players want to
And
be in.
Wolfenstein gets one of those right.
And I
It
think
doesn't
I
get
think
the other
Mario
one
gets
right.
one of those right.
Okay, then let's cut Mario.
Well, this is a
too.
discussion
I
that
think
we
that's
need to
fair.
have.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely fair reason to not have Mario in the top 3. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, I think Mario doesn't stick on this list. I think Horizon does a really good job of what I've played of it so far of that person
Well, if we cut Mario, we need to
sneaking
cut
that stuff
Wolfenstein.
into the world.
Yeah.
I think Wolfenstein you could totally cut because it has a lot of high points, has a lot of low points.
Yeah.
I think Observer is a great game for somebody sneaking all that stuff into a world and making it fun to explore. I don't know about Tacoma because I didn't play it.
I like Tacoma's World quite a bit. I didn't even play all of it. I just watched you guys when we had Steve Gaynor in there.
The only knock I have against Tacoma's World is that, in their design of a very plausible sort of, labor class sort of space station, they've designed something that looks like a lot of other sci-fi.
Right.
Like that to me is the only major knock, is that when I was looking at it, I was like, I have seen this exact kind of station design and this exact kind of world, like space environment many times over. But I think the way that they tie the story into that stuff, the way they tie the AR stuff into it, the little details like the fact that the way you interact with the computer is through the sign language stuff, like little stuff like that, like makes it feel more organic than just another rote fucking space station that you've gone on a million times.
Sure, and like honestly, in a story about working for a corporation that doesn't respect its workers, I would expect the environment to be utilitarian.
Exactly. Yes.
Like I wouldn't expect it to look interesting.
And I think Zelda does do a good job of getting you rewarded for even this like war that happened thousands of or 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously doesn't spend a ton of time on the story stuff, and certainly the main story is not the draw of that game, but there is a mystery throughout that world, like when you first see the dragons, or it's night and you see a scale fall from the sky, or a weird ghost horse. Yeah. It makes you want to... There's a sense of mystery and wonder about that world.
It seems like something happened in it.
Yeah, and you want to poke around, you want to see what's going on, you want to find out what that scale
Even
was.
if I don't know if it's like it's pretty barren.
The thing Zelda does with its, post-apoc world is kind of a little bit more of what I wish Nier did with that stuff, in the sense that, again, there are a lot of things I like about what Nier does with its extremely limited assets, but I wish that there was just like a bit more detail in there in terms of like what was in that space before the ruin, and like what was actually happening there, what were the what were the elements of that world beyond just the buildings and the structures. And that's the thing that I think that Zelda does really well.
I think they do it pretty well. I mean, again, if we go back to like somebody wrote this whole history and then gave it to a level designer, I think that level designer or environmental designer did a great job of peppering that throughout the world to make it look like this stuff actually happened.
Like that and Horizon do a great job at that stuff.
Yeah, well, with Zelda, it's not like there's a million text logs or some 30-minute cutscene.
It's scenery, but a lot of it is scenery.
Some of that's going around taking those pictures with your Sheikah slate
that's
and then
the main story stuff.
Getting that stuff back.
I mean, that's the main story, which I don't think is the strongest thing, but that's never been what drew me to Zelda. It's just
like when you take those
world.
pictures and get those like flashback cutscenes, like I feel like that stuff was just
fine.
It was a good reveal of like, all this voice acting is rotten.
Yeah, the story's not anything to write home about.
No, well, I'm just saying it happens. Right? There is some of that, but I think they do a decent job. I found it to be a little one-notey. Like it's like mostly finding those what are the tentacle robots?
Guardians?
Yeah, it's mostly finding old Guardians that are rusted out in a spot.
I think there's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think the villages are super engaging and interesting and cool.
Yeah,
and I think that there's a lot of rich world stuff in there that's not necessarily like directly like story stuff, but I think it's very much like, oh man, like this stuff happened 100 years ago or whatever. Like I think that there's a lot of rich stuff to discover in the villages.
Like maybe the most full of surprises of any game I have ever played.
I remember like climbing this big mountain, and when I got over the top, I saw one of those huge like cube maze areas, and be like, what the fuck is that? And, like I want to go over there and find out what that is.
Or I think the first time, like for me, like one of the things that is fun about exploring that world is like the first time you get one of those giant skeletal titan, the skeletal versions of the giants with the one eye.
Oh, right.
They just pop out of nowhere because it's nighttime and start chasing around the field. Like that stuff is cool when you're exploring because it's not set up in a way that's like go fight this guy.
Yeah, or you see like one of those huge boulders and you walk up to it and like you're going to try to climb it, and then like it gets up and it's alive. It's like, whoa, what the fuck?
That's really neat. And I think
there's that village you show up to where there's a little statue at the beginning and you talk to it and it ends up like I think it steals your hearts or something. And
you can trade in
that's where
or whatever. It is. I mean, eventually it becomes a mechanic, but like at the time you're just like fucking what? You just took my upgrades. Like
and
what's
stuff,
going on?
Stuff like Terrytown, this weird little like island, this plateau where they're building this little town. And I think there's a ton of character. It's not this big barren field that I think some people are painting it as. I think I know, like when I think about the game, I do remember plenty of running through fields and stuff, but when you think about how much stuff is populated across that entire map, there is a ton of
and if
stuff
they crammed all
there.
that stuff together so it was just like bang bang bang, it would be way less
it would be bad.
impactful.
And I also think they do a very good job in that again somebody wrote this whole thing of what it's supposed to be in designing it so that middle of the map is treacherous, right? Like feels like you're heading into like this Mordor-esque area of like, oh, and very well realized, right? It gets more dangerous, like the swirling mists around it.
And I think like part and parcel with the thing I said about how you can go anywhere at any time, and there's no structure to the like the direction you go in. Like when you go where it's dangerous, shit kills you immediately. You know, like there's no indication. Hey, these things are more dangerous than these other things.
Right. They didn't put a level number on a section of the map.
It's very willing to fuck you over if you go in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
it's
dangerous in a way that it sort of surprises you.
And it teaches you this.
It's dangerous.
It teaches you this without like, oh, are you sure you want to come into this area? Like, here's an icon showing these enemies are too leveled up for you. Like, you find out the first time a guardian hits you with their laser, and you fucking die right away.
By Nintendo standards, it's remarkably unwilling to hold you by the hand and lead you around.
So here's where it got bad, and I don't know if we were talking about this with this category. I feel like we're not. So that all came together, and then a gameplay person said, "Well, we have to gate how quickly they can run around the world, so let's put this rain in the game."
The
ruined pinned it on you, the level guy, and then Ben, the gameplay guy, was like, "People are progressing too fast. They shouldn't be able to get here too quickly. Let's make it rain and put this fatigue meter that."
I think it has
Ben
more to
loves
do
to
with
make
the
it rain.
stamina meter than the rain thing.
Yeah,
like the rain thing happens at inopportune times, and it sucks.
The rain is awful. Like the rain, I have a huge complaint about the rain.
I hate
I would be
it. It's
climbing
terrible.
halfway up something. I would take so long to get there, and then it would rain, and I'd be like, "Well, fuck that." Or I would have that fire thing. I have to light the torches. Then it would rain, and I'd be like, "I just have to stand here."
You become
and
the victim of circumstance in that game that'll add 5 or 10 minutes of tedium to something that should have taken 30 seconds. So like I would bet that with like all the temperature mechanics and the cooking and all that shit, that was like intentional on their part. Like they wanted you to suffer at times.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I think it sucks, but it feels intentional to me.
Like, and I think that's like the one big wrong decision they make about as far as like how people interact with that world.
Yeah.
The thing, durability.
Like if there had been
any weapon durability or inventory management.
I was talking about specifically about the world interaction, not just about weapon or like that kind of stuff.
I think it's like it's the one example in that game of where they give you an obstacle and don't give you a way to surmount it.
Right.
Like the temperature shit, you know, it's like, oh, I can find warmer gear or cook a thing that'll let me go where it's cold. But like when it rains, you're just fucked. Like there's no
recourse really.
It's like
magic
the rain is the one thing that takes this hero of all time out is like the rain.
Right.
Like
hey, sometimes you plan a picnic and it rains, and that's just
if Ganon had just put wet walls on his castle, like he'd be like, I can't get through. I can't.
It's just a moat.
I'm lost.
Look, there's a reason Ganon keeps getting defeated. Okay, he's not that good at this.
He's no Bowser.
So I think the thing that maybe keeps Zelda and Origins on here more so than Horizon Dawn, so that this isn't just 3 open world games necessarily, is that in both Zelda and Assassin's Creed, I didn't want to use fast travel in those games very much.
Right.
I loved the act of just walking around, even in like the larger, more empty spaces. Like I really enjoyed the traveling aspect of it because it...
And like in Assassin's Creed, it's really cool where you can just set your horse to auto go towards the objective.
And it doesn't always work, but it does, certainly not as well as Witcher or something like that. But yeah.
But while it's happening, you know, you can have your bird scout out stuff. You can like look at the map and look at objectives and try and figure, oh, there's like a question mark over here. You can like do a couple things while you're moving towards your objective, which helped me interact with the world in a way where if I was just fast traveling anywhere, I wouldn't have normally.
Like in both of those games, the mere act of just moving from place to place really feeds into the sense of grand adventure that both those games are going for. With Horizon, once I'd kind of seen a new environment, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll come back here if I have to, but I don't really like it was pretty. It was nice to look at, but like I didn't care that much about like the act of going around there.
Yeah, 15, 20 hours into that game, I have hit the point where I just want to fast travel between story
Horizon?
missions. Yeah, I really don't enjoy moving around.
Horizon is definitely a game where, like, at some point I realized, I need to do these things to make fast travel free, and then I was like, I immediately did that.
Yeah. I will say Assassin's Creed World hasn't like hooked me yet. I'm not at a point maybe where it has, but like I've been to Alexandria and like I've been around. Like, Alexandria seems like a cool city to hang out in, but like it's not blowing me away. I don't want to really explore.
The cities are pretty unique. I was surprised. Like Memphis is really cool. I don't know.
Is Memphis the one that had like all the swampland around it?
Memphis is the one that like you ride in there and you're like, oh, it smells like death, and there's like a weird fog and
And there's a whole story element that you sort of tease out through like side missions and stuff about why that's like that. I don't know. Like I think that, especially the deeper you get into that game and the more you start engaging with like some of the more open spaces where like, you know, there are like hidden tombs and the various pyramids are kind of out there. Like I think that, I don't know, I think the rendering of that world makes it such a delight to move through, you know? And
How do you guys feel about these 1, 2, and 3? Just right there on the list.
I like Observer probably just more in this category than A Night in the Woods.
Yeah, I think I do too.
And I maybe feel a little more strongly about Tacoma in that regard than I think Night in the Woods, the way they designed that town, I think the way they sort of place the important characters throughout it, and the way they use the environments to kind of give that sense of, kind of small town tedium, but also just kind of like pleasantness is really cool. But I'm willing to concede that it may not be top 3.
I like Night in the Woods a lot. I like discovering that world a lot. I like interacting with the world a lot. But I also found sometimes I would be like, I have to like climb this big building. Oh, I fell at a bad spot. And like then I have to go all the way back up just to talk to this person I want to talk to. And sometimes I found that a little bit less fun.
I feel like they really, really nailed what it feels like to go back to your hometown after it has changed. And maybe that's not exactly world, but like that I've never experienced like I did in that game from other mediums of like wow, I've only been gone for like 2 years, but everything is completely different.
I think this will come up more when we talk about moments and characters and story, and I think that stuff will factor in more. I think the world is very good in that game, and I think they did a good job on it, but there are stronger games on this current nominee list.
Did you get rid of Observer?
Yeah, who got rid of Observer? I thought
No, I think... No, I don't think so.
No. I think we were saying that maybe Wolfenstein Horizon can go and that Night in the Woods can go, but I think it
sounds like Tacoma also. Like that's to me that's like the 3-4, but I'm not super
I think there's a strong argument for Tacoma, but I also think there is maybe an equally strong argument for Observer.
You guys have to. I haven't played Observer.
I played both.
Okay, so Night in the Woods definitely going.
I think Night in the Woods can go.
Sure.
Yeah. I played both, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't played Assassin's Creed. That enough of it to talk about the world, because what I have played, I was like, okay, the world is fine. It's
I also haven't played that, so I'm
it's like a sandy
to people here.
Barren.
But what I've seen of it,
it's actually really diverse.
I
in
haven't
terms of
gotten to that part yet. I'm looking forward to it because right now it's just sandy, whatever.
I haven't gotten to if there are better exploration parts, but like I've definitely gotten to like Alexandria is a big city, and like it's definitely different than where you start out.
Like I watched Jeff play some of it at a point where he was riding a camel in the desert, and I was like, that's a lot of flat sand. Like that.
Yeah,
I come off as like a very interesting world.
I mean, spent very little time in the desert.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like there are desert areas for sure, and I think if you're talking about a game in ancient Egypt, like that stuff absolutely has to be in there.
Sure.
But like the different cities do have kind of their own little distinct visual personalities to them. Especially when you start getting into the areas that are inhabited by the Greeks or occupied by the Romans and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
the desert works the same way that the open space in Zelda does, where it creates these moments where you're happening upon this big city and you go, oh shit,
yeah.
But I also think just in terms of like this category too, like when I'm terracing with my horse through one of the big cities and there's zero consequence as I'm mowing down every pedestrian, it kind of takes me out of that world. Like if you were to, again, have the Bible that says we want a really dense city, and then you be like, okay, I built this really big thing, and then the gameplay guy be like, well, I need to get you through this city very quickly, and there's like zero consequence for me destroying everybody in that city.
I feel like all three of us would look at you and go like, it's an open world game.
Yeah, that's
we have a lot to do.
And then I would say, well, I guess we're not winning best world. Because like that has taken me out a bit of it, of like, okay, there should be, like, I don't know if I would reward it for that.
I took that as, man, I bet that happened all the time back then.
Can you see it? Like you also see it a lot. Like when you're standing on the street, like you'll see like those Greek soldiers come through, and they will just fucking trample
running
people.
each other over. It's
and
fucking
all the
amazing.
pedestrians and stuff have really good lines of like, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" and stuff like that, which adds to the world. Like they deal with this shit every day, and they're like, "Hey, fuck you with your horse, huh?"
Okay.
They hadn't figured out horses yet.
I'm just going to throw this out and see what people think. Zelda, Tacoma, Observer?
I mean,
I don't know that I'm willing to let go of Origins from this category, because to me it was very much the thing that made me want to have this category.
Can we drop Horizon? I mean, it seems like
I'm
willing to let
so
Horizon go.
Bummed, man. With like 3 tweaks, Horizon might have been my game of the year, but there's like 3 things about playing it that just drive me so nuts that.
And one of those things makes exploring that world just not as fun as it should be.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about like dry areas between interesting things, there's so many just like giant areas that just have a few, dinosaurs walking around that all look the exact
Totally.
same.
When I first started playing that game, like I zoomed the map out and I was like, man, there's so many things to do. Look at all these icons. And then, the more I explored it, the less I interested in it I was.
It's kind of interesting to see, like, okay, this is clearly supposed to be like Colorado, and this is kind of more Nevada and the desert, and figuring out where in America this was all supposed to represent.
The moment that broke me in that game was there's not that many tall necks in the game, right? And there's like 5 of them or something. So you probably remember there's one that's circling like a cultist camp.
Yes.
Yep. And you show up and she's like, oh, it looks like they're trying to capture the tall neck. Or I was like, oh, that's a cool, interesting tweak on this thing. There are these dudes trying to stop. Anyway, I got in there and like you can't climb on anything in there. There's all these surfaces and like things that in a normal open world game it looks like you should be able to like scurry up and hide behind a thing, and like no, you just sort of jump aimlessly.
That was a really hard game to have come out in the same like quarter or time frame as Zelda because it really
totally
like the climbing stuff got really hard.
It sounds like even Assassins handles climbing really well now.
I don't want to rip on Assassins too much because again, I think I actually do like it. Just not my Assassin's Creed game that I was. But they let you climb sheer surfaces like it's nobody's business.
Dude, yes, so that's what I wanted in Horizon.
I think again that that's probably one of my problems with Assassin's Creed. They have just like almost Saints wrote it to the point of like it's a video game.
I mean, they woke up one day and realized that climbing gameplay is bad gameplay, and they just solved it by saying, fuck it, you can climb.
But they don't go as far as something like Mordor, where you can climb on literally fucking everything.
I don't know if I have found a thing that I cannot climb on.
I got something this morning, spiky fence posts.
Yeah, also, when you're climbing up the pyramids, for instance, you can't just find any brick to hold on to. Like, there is a very designed pattern that you have to kind of follow to get up. Like, you have to find the missing bricks or the little, like...
That feels like something they would have done specifically for the pyramids because they're the pyramids.
Well, I'm just saying that's the thing is that they don't just let you climb that thing up all willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Like, you have to find a way up there.
Tall necks are the exact same way. Like, climbing those things looks amazing and also is kind of a cool little, like, oh, I got to spin the camera and see where the next handhold is here. But those are very clearly designed and authored.
Yeah.
And those big camps, like I was talking about, are a goddamn chore to get around.
I'm not saying that, like, looking for every loose brick on the side of a giant tower was super fun, but like you are fairly Spider-Man-esque in this in a way that is like, somebody was like, listen, we've done this a million times.
Bayek's a raw motherfucker.
Yeah, he is.
You had to be back then. The horses were running people down in the streets. You had to learn to get off the street and climb.
He's the last Medjai. He's the last cop. He's got to fucking do this shit. No one else can do it.
All right, delete Horizon?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then between Tacoma and Observer, I think it's just going to come down to personal preference. Like
I've only played Tacoma, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And
I think I like Tacoma a lot, and I think that the world feels really real and rich and full. But I think I would lean more towards Observer, just because Observer has so much going on in it, and it feels so. Like, I really don't think I've played another game that looks or feels like Observer while playing it.
Yeah, so, like, the thing I would get to here, or I guess I'm trying to just figure out in my personal... not having played enough of Tacoma to know, does exploring the environment help with the main like, plot along?
It does.
It is that. Like,
that's the entire game.
Accessing every new environment because of the way the AR memory conversation-y things work. Like, that is how the story is told.
Because in Observer, like, there's a lot of like that could just be style. Like, there is some detective work stuff you have to do. Remember, like, you have to put the detective vision thing on.
I mean, I think there's a lot of fun exploring, like going door to door, like checking out the space.
Yeah,
like there's a part in Tacoma where you move into, like, I don't know, it's a fuel storage or whatever. Like, you move into a room that has clearly, like, gotten fucked up. It's like something exploded in there or whatever. And then you jack in and access, like, the memory of what happened, and you see the people moving around in it before and during the disaster. So, like, the environment is used in storytelling,
right? But that's
ways and
right. But are you, like, going over and touching a coffee cup, reading the bottom of it to figure out what the next move is?
No, I mean, everything you pick up and examine is just sort of flavor for the world.
Okay, because then like, Observer does the same thing. Then, like, I was thinking more like I was looking at all the cool fucking analog data jacks and stuff, but it didn't help with the story.
You're accessing people's computers and reading their stuff on their desktops.
Yeah, but you're doing that.
Finding things in their drawers that do solve puzzles.
I mean, it's gone home in space in that regard. Is that so much of the interactive environment is flavor. It is not vital to progressing.
I think it's good flavor, though.
No, it's great flavor. I'm not denigrating the flavor profile here, but
Observer is maybe a little more like walking through really cool stuff. Like when you jack into people's heads, you kind of just have to go through them a little more. You have to do like some puzzle solving when you have to do like to find the jacks. That might be more of a style thing at some point.
I do really
know what
like
I mean?
the griminess of Observer's style and world, like the way they've dressed that world.
I guess I mean less like I do mean how it looks, because I think it is a very interesting looking world, but I think going in and out of people's heads is an interesting world thing, and I think that it feels so different in each person's memory, I think is also where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I think that makes it feel like this bigger world than it is, even though you're just in this like apartment block. Like you're going in and out of people's memories. They have their own inner world that you are stepping into, but it still feels like cohesive with the game, and it still feels like the world of the game and the world of like you're going into someone's head versus like this pristine memory. It's usually like fucked up and like weird because they're like dead.
Yeah, and I think you are pulling a lot of story out of what you see. Like especially like there's that whole little plot with the woman who wants to like inhabit the body of the kid or whatever, and like you go into their room,
right?
And,
Yes,
like, all that
like
stuff.
that's a weird world thing. I think.
Yeah,
to me.
I haven't played enough Tacoma to know if that stuff, how integrated that other stuff is with what you're seeing versus like the style of it is cool, because Observer is a fucking rad place to look around in.
Right. I mean, I think Tacoma is really cool, and I like the world of Tacoma. It feels like a real world.
So I'm gonna leave this one up to you.
Oh goodness. But like I feel like Tacoma I think that there are moments of like, oh cool, I like discovered this person's living space, I discovered that person's living space, and I really like the sort of juxtaposition of like, look at this like fucking wrecked space, and then you see the people interacting in it as though it's normal. I think that is really cool and fascinating, but I think it's so sort of on the rails.
I also feel like Tacoma, if that stuff wasn't interesting, if that stuff didn't work, that whole game falls apart.
Like that game is
Right.
all world.
Yeah.
in a
Right.
sense.
Yes. And I think that when you are exploring before you play the tapes, it's not as interesting. Like I don't think the world itself before you play the memories is as good as the world before you hop into the brains.
Yeah,
of
but I
Observer.
think you kind of have to know the characters before the stuff that you find that belongs to them means anything, right?
I mean,
Like,
kind of.
I think they have to work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Tacoma has a great world. Like, I think I would want my top 3 to be Zelda, Tacoma, Observer, but I just don't have enough history with Assassin's Creed to really speak to it.
Yeah, same.
I really like the Assassin's Creed world. I mean, I never really got into like the world to a degree in an open world game in a long time. I'm more of a mainline. Like I'll do the main objectives, I'll do some of the side objectives, and I won't go much out of my way.
Does the world surprise you?
Yeah, I'm constantly like finding, like I was running through, I forget what city I was in, but I turned the corner and there was a city block and it was a bunch of houses where they were all like making dye. Mm-hmm. And so you're like running through and the sound effect of you kind of splashing on the wet dye stuff. And like, then I hopped up on the rooftops and there were people making other things. Like it felt like a city. It felt like,
and that extends beyond the major cities too. Like there's a part in that game where you go to an area where they are making it's like a salt flat, and they're making the stuff they use to embalm bodies, basically. And all the people there, like on top of it just looking like this really spread out, kind of crazy looking mine, like all the people are like caked in the dust in a way that you don't see elsewhere in the game.
Or you're like going down a riverbank and all of a sudden a hippo charges you and you realize you've hit a hippo's nest out of nowhere, and you kind of look around and you see like them coming out of a little hive, and there's treasure in there. Like you can tell there's like corpses, so you can tell like this is an area where some people have gone and got murked by a bunch of hippos. And so you're like, oh,
don't go to the hippo hive.
Yeah, don't.
Well, I mean, there was a legendary.
All right, fair
Go to
enough.
the elephant graveyard.
Okay, I guess if it's up to me between Tacoma and Observer, I guess talking it out more, thinking about it more, I guess I would lean more towards Tacoma just because there were aspects of walking through Observer that were like a fucking slog and a half. But like I think the world in Observer is really cool and really interesting, especially in the end game. And like, I think it's, God, I don't want to pick between these two. I think it's hard.
Oh, Observer's World is so fucking rad. The desk
so
that comes down from the
cool.
ceiling.
It's so cool. The world in Observer is so cool. I don't know.
I wish I had time to play that.
Now, the more I talk about it, now I think I do want to lean towards Observer just because I like Tacoma, but I'm not
I will
as
say that, like,
surprised by Tacoma.
what you were saying about Observer
Right.
sounded way more interesting.
Right. And like, I think what I like about Tacoma is that it feels like a real world,
it's
but I'm
very
not
real,
necessarily so
well-realized.
jazzed about, like, I'm not all that surprised by the world itself. Like, I think that it feels like a real rich place to walk in. I like what I discover while in it, but I think the design of it, I think a lot of the aspects of it don't feel all that new necessarily, or all that kind of exciting in the same way that Observer is like, wow, this is a fucking wacky ass place I'm walking through.
Yeah,
It's bananas.
even if you give Observer like the most dismissive description, which is to say, yeah, boy, they sure did put a whole lot of Blade Runner into that. Like, I think the ways that it builds on that are actually pretty creative and interesting. Like, it isn't just a one-to-one, like, yeah, we really like Blade Runner, so here's some cyberpunk bullshit. Like,
Right.
that, like, the way they implement the cyberpunk elements into that world, there's a damp unpleasantness to all of it,
Absolutely.
and just a kind of grotesqueness to it that is like it's unpleasant, but it totally serves what they are trying to do in that game.
Yeah, and I think when I think back to Observer and Tacoma, I think I took more away from the world of Observer than I did of Tacoma. I think I took away a great story from Tacoma.
I mean,
What's your pick,
I
Alex?
could totally go either way, but I think
I think you guys are the only two that have played both.
I mean, I played both, but I don't know.
Has anybody else? Did you play
I
both?
played like a little bit of Tacoma.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've only played Tacoma.
I tried Tacoma out.
I think that, like, again, I might lean a little harder on Tacoma just because I finished Tacoma and I didn't finish Observer, but I think that the argument for Observer is strong, and I'm willing to go along with it.
I think I lean more towards Observer.
I guess
Sounds
yeah,
good to me.
I can.
I think also I would say the Observer messes with the world a
Right.
lot when you're in the minds of people. The way they like do weird geometry
Yes.
manipulation
Yes.
and like
there's aspects of the world that's like what's real, what's not real.
Yeah.
Like the
That sounds
world
really
is
cool.
like bananas.
the world.
It really
very
is.
bananas.
It's bananas.
Most
It's like
bananas.
genuinely. I think I've described the world like when you're inside the minds as like anxiety inducing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like in a way that like games don't usually do. Of
Right.
like I can't play this for a while. I have to put this down.
Right.
Yeah.
It has a very specific tone and feeling that it nails, as well as just being like an interesting place to explore and like a diverse place to explore. As far as like, I feel like each room feels different. It feels like different living spaces and different minds.
It fucking
when you're inside of
sucks.
them.
That world sucks.
It sucks, but it's good.
But it's really good at sucking.
All right.
I think
so
that's a
what
really
wins?
strong top three.
Zelda.
Zelda with a bullet, man.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I mean, look, man, Assassin's Creed does such a good job.
I
with
agree,
stuff. It's the
but-
best open world Ubisoft has ever made.
It doesn't have the same thing that Zelda has, which is like looking at something that you have no idea what
Right.
it
It's
is.
not surprising in that way.
What is
I
that
was-
floating thing in the sky?
Yes.
And then you find out, oh, that's a dungeon bird thing. Like that.
I was wowed by Zelda at so many points.
Zelda feels like the first game to truly realize the potential of an open world
Yes,
to me
yes.
in a way that all these other games don't.
100%.
And as much as I do love Assassin's Creed Origins and in exploring that space, they definitely do the hand-holding thing of like, hey, there are a million question marks on this map, so you
Yeah.
know there is a thing there, you just don't know what it is.
What does climbing the towers do in Assassin's Creed now?
You unlock fast travel points.
Is that it?
Yeah.
And
Okay,
then
so no more
it also
uncovering the map
it fills
right
in
now.
more.
Oh, really?
It doesn't uncover the map, but it fills in some more like.
It's like some of the objectives will be
question
question
mark
marks. It'll turn them into icons.
Yeah.
If in that area.
As long as
also.
they're within range, yeah.
That's so cool about the game. Is weird for me. I don't know what's going on.
Like they took a hard look at like they sat down and were like, what the fuck is Assassin's Creed? And then they made strong changes to really like bring that series ahead into now and streamline some of the shit out of it.
Something about it just feels like they like a mishmash of what it was and like also 2017.
Well, it's a game made by diverse cultural people of multiple religions. That's true.
Well, I think it's crazy that before Zelda came out and you found out about the towers, they're like, oh, they're doing the Ubisoft thing. I climbed the tower, I get a fast travel point, which is true. You get that and it fills in the map and all that stuff. But almost more importantly than that is just the vantage point of just being able to see all this
Yeah,
stuff
it's
and marking
so
the map
cool.
and everything.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes that so
They
much
ended
cooler.
up making the towers one of the best parts of the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love like looking out and like picking like I want to go there. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
even like
It's a very strong argument. I
yeah.
think.
And there's a trust in the player there that is expressed with that I think is really cool.
Yeah.
I think there are details in the way that game's made that we as not game designers would not think about. Like when we had the Idle Thumbs guys on the podcast a while back, they pointed out like I don't know what the technical term is for the glowing shit in that game, like the purple and the blue and orange
Like
stuff.
the beacons?
No, like specifically like on shrines and certain other points of interest. The
Like
little
the
indicators
texture
of like, oh, you've beaten this one, you've unlocked this one.
like whatever the technical term is for those types of like maps or surfaces. Like they work through all types of weather, all types of like day and night lighting.
yeah.
Like it's a subtle like beacon to the player saying,
I
like,
want to
hey,
say
pay attention to this
signposting is
thing.
the term.
Sorta, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so cool. Like if you're really far away, you'll see like just 1 or 2 pixels of orange. And be like,
Totally.
oh, there's something
Totally.
there.
I think that was
Yeah.
the whole point, is that even no matter how like rainy or whatever
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
that will catch your eye enough to draw you to
I
it.
just want to play that game again.
It's so good.
I'm totally cool with Zelda taking this.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think Zelda is the whole reason this category exists.
Well, actually, it was Assassin's Creed,
technically.
but that said, I think the case for Zelda is extremely strong.
Yeah.
All right, Zelda Breath of the Wild, best world. Assassin's Creed Origins and Observer, also good worlds.
We did it.
We should probably take a break.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a break.